It's back to school season, and if you are anything like me, you are loving these big displays of stationery and other office supplies on display at every single store you visit. And that's why today I want to let all of our memoir writers get in on a little bit of this fun by going through what are the supplies that you must have to get started on your memoir. Stay tuned. You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/bookclub to sign up. There is something about August that just feels like a fresh start to me. And granted, that's probably partly because I have been in the school system at some area or another for the vast majority of my life. But even yet, even as I'm not in that world anymore, there is something that seems so magical about just starting over, getting all new supplies, going into, for your kids, a new grade, and all of us get this kind of release of the heat of summer soon, headed into fall that can just feel so rejuvenating. And I will say, I love stationery. I love an office supply. I understand that this is probably a very stereotypical thing about me, and that is okay. I'm totally okay with that. But I thought that it would be fun to really go into some of the supplies that are really helpful as you're writing your memoir. So I am, of course, being a little bit cheeky here, comparing it to school supplies. But I promise you, this video is a real list of the things that can be helpful, as well as some things that I would either avoid or just be kind of careful with as you're moving through your memoir. So let's get right into it. This is a busy season. So without further ado, I have a list here. Number one, no one will be surprised to hear that this is a number one. Get a good journal and a really nice pen that you like to write with. Now, I want to show off a little bit the journals that are my very, very favorite. Y'all have heard me talk about journals, and I don't know that I've ever showed off the ones that I love. So I will say, whenever I'm in a new place, if I can go to a stationery store, I will do that and buy myself a kind of a fun journal. But I also have journals that are just my kind of standard go-to, and I go through like 12 to 18 of these a year, so I do buy them in bulk actually. And my very favorite are by a brand called Jumping Fox. So this is how it comes in the mail. You can see it's, maybe you can see it's shrink wrapped, and then it's in a kind of cardboard sleeve. But I also have one that I took out. So this is actually quite an old journal. You can see that it's kind of worn. But so this was a very well-loved journal. You can kind of see the branding, I think, is really, really pretty and simple. They have both dot journals and line journals. So I like a line journal. My right hand in the Memoir Method, Emily Thrash, she likes a dot journal. You have both of these with Jumping Fox, and they also have binder versions where you can put in loose leaf pages. So that is to say, I am a huge fan of those journals. They don't bleed through. Just delightful. And I also like the rollerball gel pens, the Pilot G2s. So I always have those in as many colors as possible. The ones I can even just grab. This is kind of an Easter assortment here. I like them because they write really smoothly to me. But the point is not which journal and which pens. I am not a commissioned person on either of those brands. The point is that having a journal around, even if you're not a journaler, can be really, really helpful as you're heading into your memoir writing process. And there are two reasons for this. The first, and I will tell you, this creeps up on people, but I've seen it a lot. The first is that even though I know we are all experts in our own stories, of course, I know you are an expert in your own story, me too, but unfortunately, one thing that really happens quite often is once we get around the middle of that story, typically, although it can happen anywhere in the book, there will be scenes that you do remember them happening, but the details aren't really right at the front of your brain. Like you have to kind of dig around for them. And one thing that can happen is that can make writing really unpleasant. Whenever we're sitting at the computer and we're kind of trying to invent from that baseline level, it can really feel kind of frustrating. So one thing that we will recommend pretty often in the Memoir Method, that is our group program for women who are writing their memoirs, by the way, check it out, pageandpodium.com/memoir-method. We will often recommend that when women find themselves in this place where they're kind of sitting at the computer, they're not remembering the details, they feel like they're kind of just wasting time sitting there, we will recommend that they close the computer, step away from your laptop, and take out that journal and journal. Write that scene. Now, the purpose here is not to write it and then you'll just type it up and the scene is ready. In fact, the opposite. When we encourage people to journal these scenes that they have forgotten, we want them to be as messy as possible. We want them to have redundancies. We want them to have stuff that absolutely no one cares about, details that are so minute, it's weird that you didn't even forget it. We want all of that stuff down. We want everything on that page out of your brain, because once it's out of our brain, we are so much better able to see what we've got to work with. We're so much better able to filter through what's important, to pick out the details that look really good. And very often, some of the details that will be the juiciest, the most delicious for your book are the details that will come up at the end of that journaling session. You've been writing kind of all the stuff that you knew off the top, but as you dig, you will very, very often start to come up with some connections that you wouldn't have if you just sat down at the computer and tried to start writing. So the first couple things I want you to buy a really nice journal, treat yourself if you like that kind of thing, and some pens that you really like to work with. So that is the first thing. The second thing I want you to get is you have a couple of options here. We need something to organize our structure, and one of the things that I will recommend are note cards for that. Now, this is something that I personally do. I have a huge stack of note cards that I'm using to work on my own memoir, where I have written different scenes that I think might be helpful, different kinds of notes, different ideas, intellectual, kind of philosophical concepts I want to put in there. So each note card kind of has its own thing on it. And what you can do with that then is organize, mix around, resort until you feel really happy with how things are working. Now, the other thing that a note card system will allow you to do is really keep track of things. So one of the things that will happen is that you'll have your planning period. We teach all of this, by the way, in the Memoir Method, but you'll have your kind of planning period, the steps of planning out your memoir's structure. And during that time, we will encourage people, and if you're doing it on your own, you'll do this too, to kind of filter out what matters more than other things. So we're really making sure that we're dialing that memoir into the message that you're wanting to share. Now, that does necessarily mean that not everything is going to make it in. But a piece of magic that will happen pretty often is that as people start writing, they'll realize that either, I thought that scene would work really well in chapter 10, actually need it in chapter 3, or, actually this scene, I don't think it's as relevant as I thought, or I kind of changed my mind on this concept. You get the idea. Things basically will just shift and change as you're working through the process. It's just part of it. And having that stack of note cards gives you kind of an idea bank or a story bank, or both, that you can draw from. For example, when you stole that scene out of chapter 10 to put it in chapter 3, you need a new scene in chapter 10 now, right? So you can go through that idea bank and figure out what you want to use. So note cards can be really, really helpful for that, and of course, very, very affordable. So I highly recommend kind of thinking about that process, especially if you're a tactile person. If you're someone that likes that goes to the store and touches all the clothes, that's what I do. Note cards can be really nice if you like that kind of tactile experience. But I wanted to tack a couple of other things onto this because you don't actually need note cards. You just need something that will allow you to replicate this. So there are two other options that we use and recommend quite a bit. The first one is to use an Excel document. Now this would require you to either have Microsoft Excel, or you can do it with Google Sheets or any other kind of similar program. Numbers, I think, is what the Apple one's called. The purpose that we're doing here is we're using each individual line on that spreadsheet for something you'd put on a note card. So that might be, the name, kind of the title of a scene. It might be the kind of name or title or keyword for a philosophy or an idea. We have one of those on each of the lines of that Excel sheet. And what that'll allow you to do is do different things with sorting. So you can have your first column just be all of the keywords, all of the titles, and then your second column can be something that you'll use to sort. So this might either be something like beginning, middle, end. It might be something like kind of a topic or kind of a general subtopic grouping that you might put. It might be years. And in fact, this is a tool that we offer in the Memoir Method. We have a downloadable sheet that will allow you to sort all those stories by year and sort out the ideas and other things that aren't kind of time bound. So Excel can work really well for that if you are good at it. I also find though that either this is going to be a very easy, obvious thing for you, or you just absolutely do not want to do it because you hate Excel. If that is the case, that is totally fine. Excel is not required. You can use the note card system, or the second alternative I mentioned earlier is a program called Scrivener. Now, I have very, very intentionally put Scrivener in this list because I've been hearing a lot about it. So this just happens from time to time that there'll be kind of a wave of awareness of Scrivener. It is a great program. So I want to tell you up front, if you've heard of this, both Emily and I use Scrivener for our writing projects, both for our own writing projects and projects we do for our clients. Scrivener is effectively a writing program that has some organizational tools built in. So it does have a note card system that you can use very, very similar to what I have been describing. And when you use that note card system, Scrivener will also then let you pull up particular, they call them files, particular pages of your document that correspond with these note cards so that you kind of have some sense of what goes where, what goes with what. And as you're writing, you can very naturally kind of pull things together in that program. But the specific reason I wanted to bring up Scrivener is that I want to give a little kind of word of caution here. I do find that if you're somebody that kind of likes playing with technology, Scrivener can be a lot of edutainment that really functions as procrastination. So what I want you to do, if you're somebody that's curious about Scrivener, it is totally fine to get it and play with it. But I do want you to give yourself kind of a time limit on how long you'll let yourself play with some of the fun features. I will say in the Memoir Method, Emily just made a training on Scrivener so that you have all you need. If you're in that program, you can check that out in the vault. But if you are not a part of the Memoir Method program, move forward with Scrivener. It is a great, great program. Just a word of caution that it can sometimes be a little bit distracting, and we want to make sure we're on task. Whichever of those you choose, or you may even have some different organizational system that you like, the main thing is that it's going to let you move around your different pieces to see what goes with what and which sections go where, and two, that it's going to be able to hang around for you as an idea bank as you're moving through the writing process. Okay, so we started with just a journal and pens, so fun. We moved on to our organizational systems, and then our third thing on that shopping list is Microsoft Word. Now, this is a little bit optional because there are, of course, in this year, 2025, there are, of course, workarounds for this, but I do recommend that if you can swing it, you pick up a copy of Word. Now, I personally, and when I bring new staff on and we're, giving them what they need to do their job, I will typically always do the downloadable version of Word rather than the cloud version. You can still, by the way, buy the downloadable version. They kind of will discourage you from doing this, but I find that the downloadable version is just much more reliable. I just like it a lot better than the cloud version. You also have a little bit more flexibility, I think, with where you're going to write, that kind of thing. But the real reason I want you to have Word is that it is still the industry standard. So can we do things with, say, Google Docs? Of course. Can we do things with Pages on Macs? Of course. The industry standard really is Microsoft Word. So if you are planning to self-publish, you really probably could get away with not having Word. It'll be a little bit trickier when you get later to the process of doing your interior layout. It'll be a little trickier not to have a Word doc, but there's ways around that, right? You can always download your Google Doc as a Word doc, etc. But if you are going the traditional route, you really will want to be able to see what you're sending agents in Word, since that's how they'll be opening it. So I do want to encourage you, especially again, if you are someone who is thinking of the traditional publishing route, I really do want to encourage you to think about investing in Microsoft Word. Again, you can get the downloadable, so it's just a one and done cost. It'll last you for basically ever. So go ahead and go out and get that, again, especially if you're thinking that you want to work with a publisher. And then the fourth thing, this is less a shopping list item, although, you could write it on a whiteboard or whatnot, and more something that we're just going to work into our lives. And that is, I want you to come up with both designated spaces and naming conventions. Now, I'm talking electronics here when I talk about designated spaces in the spirit of this school supply video. But the thing that I want to be really clear about is when I say designated spaces, what I mean is on your phone, there is one place that you make notes to yourself. And on your computer, there is one place where you have all of your files, both the writing and any kind of notes, outline, other types of documents. I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with someone who's kind of picked up and put down and picked up and put down their memoir. This is very, very common with the people that I work with, by the way. And when they went to pick it up the last time, they could not even figure out what they had to work with. They could not find the files back. They really had to dig in and figure out where stuff had gone. And often stuff is just lost in that process. The easiest way to combat this is to just be very, very clear about where you are storing things. So on your phone, I personally use my Notes app to do this, and I like to have just one note that then I add to. It is one just huge note. Some people will like to go in the Notes app and do a separate note for each kind of note to themselves. Again, that's fine, but I do want to make sure that you know where that is and that you're doing that consistently. On your computer, this is probably a little bit easier actually. What I'll typically suggest is that you have one main folder. You can call it memoir, you can call it the title, whatever you'd like. And then if you want to subdivide in there, you can add more folders and things. But the main important thing is that every single file that relates to that project needs to go in that folder. Now, the second half of this, I said, this is a naming conventions thing. And this becomes very, very important when we're thinking about this folder that will eventually become so full of so many things, you will really thank yourself for sticking to naming conventions. So all I mean by that is that when you are saving things into that folder, you want to have a consistent way that you title them. So in my company, when we are delivering writing, we do ghostwriting sometimes. When we're delivering ghostwriting projects to clients, we always call the chapters the same thing. They are always called the author's last name, chapter number, draft number. Always the same across the board. It does not matter who the writer is. It does not matter who the client is. We name them all exactly the same way. And that way we know exactly how to find the thing we need. Now, this isn't only important for chapters, of course. When you're thinking about your notes, both on your computer and your phone, it's really, really important that you have naming conventions for your notes too. And just as I said, we always are putting chapter number, draft number. I would do that with your notes too. Note number, and then maybe just a little couple words of what that topic is. What is that note on? But the more you've got consistently named notes, consistently named articles you've saved, consistently named pictures, whatever it might be, the more easily you'll be able to find back what you want. And while I am no fan of efficiency for efficiency's sake, it's really, really frustrating to have your momentum be slowed down because you can't find a file. So let's set ourselves up for the most successful writing periods that we can possibly have. And one of the ways we want to do that is through our naming conventions. So, okay, the main 4 things that we have covered, you need to make sure you've got a journal, a really good pen. The second thing is you want to make sure you have an organizational system as well as a way to keep kind of an idea bank, the notes that you want to go back to. The third thing, consider getting Microsoft Word. And the fourth thing is a designated space on both your phone and your computer, as well as naming conventions to organize those 2 spaces. Now, I want to drop a few more things in that, unfortunately, you will not find in that beautiful back to school display. And those 3 things are things that you will probably need to seek out some help from, either from an experienced friend, from a professional, something like that. And the first of those is I want to make sure that you have one source for training. Now, there are many, many, many sources out there, right? But one thing that I see happen so often, especially among lifelong learners, especially among high achieving women, is we really want to kind of see all of the things that are out there. We want to watch all the YouTube videos on outlining. We want to read all of the books on writing a marketable memoir. We want to do all of the things. Too often, what happens when we try to get all the information in, I bet this has happened to you, is we just get overwhelmed. We don't really feel clear, so we just put it aside. Instead, I want you to set yourself up for success by making sure that you have a single trusted source. I'm happy to have that be me, but it doesn't have to be me. It can be any of us out here ready to help you. Even better, perhaps you invest in some kind of a system that is going to help you with that training, as well as the second thing that I want to make sure you have, which is accountability. Now, when we're thinking about accountability, oftentimes people think about somebody that's going to kind of scold you or shame you for not doing your work. I do not mean that. Rather, what I mean is that you have someone who you have informed of what your goals are and who you are expected to check in with regularly. Now, you'll have to kind of gauge what you need from that accountability person or support system in terms of the feedback that you need, the kind of tough love, the pushes when things aren't going the way you wanted them to. But whatever you need, the most important thing is that you have some kind of system set up for that accountability. Otherwise, a long-term project like a book, it just gets too hard to keep yourself motivated. Having that other person to hold you accountable, that's really, really important. And then the third thing, I want you to make sure that you have some support and encouragement. Now, sometimes people will call this like cheerleading, basically. It is so much more than that. I want you to make sure that you have someone who actually understands what you're doing. So that might not be someone that has written a book before. That really could be a therapist. And in fact, it is very, very helpful to have a therapist while you're writing your memoir. But what I want for you from the supportive piece is rather someone that's able to kind of hear what you're saying and help you reframe it. So often, the ways that we are talking to ourselves about our book, particularly early on, and particularly if you're someone that has stopped and started a few times, oftentimes we need so much more love than we think. And part of that is someone that can really genuinely dig into what you're experiencing, ask you the right questions to help you get to the root of the struggle and help you figure out the right way forward. That's not cheerleading. That is something that we all need for any kind of difficult process, right? You are doing something that is as hard as getting a PhD. You would never think you could do that without support. And you can't do this without support either. So what we want you to do is make sure that you've got someone that is encouraging, yes, supportive, yes, but also who is going to be able to really relate to the things that you're going through as you are moving through this process. So almost everything on this list is something that we include with your membership to the Memoir Method. So if you are a woman who is working on your memoir, even and especially if you have tried before and not made the progress that you wanted, I'd really like you to consider joining us. We're now accepting rolling admissions to the Memoir Method, and we have built this program out so that it has everything you could ever need in a streamlined, simple, easy to follow package. I would love to tell you more about this. You can read more at pageandpodium.com/memoir-method. And while you're over at pageandpodium.com, feel free to click that Get Started link and book a call. I would love to chat with you about what you're doing with your book, how it's going, what kinds of support you need, and how we might be able to help you at Page and Podium. So, in the meantime, go hit those back to school sales, get yourself some really fun stationery that you can really feel rejuvenated and refreshed, and just like all those kids headed back to school, ready to take on this project in earnest and really feel so good about it. I can't wait to hear how your project is going. Get some of that August energy, and I will talk to you soon. Happy writing.
You know that feeling when a book just hits you?
Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.